Hi everyone. I realized when I was looking over the syllabus that we neglected to cover something before we moved on to dormant commerce, so I wanted to make a quick video to make sure that we get coverage on that. This is one of those things that is testable in the bar exam, so I didn't want to leave it out. And that was one more issue that has to do with separation of powers. You might have noticed in your reading, but we did not talk about it this way. And the issue is, first of all, delegation and the related concept of legislative veto, or what you might just call a wrong way veto. Congress, the legislative branch, is there to set national policy, right? Congress is the lawmaking branch. I think that's pretty clear, right? And they have the authority to do everything that's listed in Article 1, Section 8, right? Those enumerated powers. Congress also has a necessary and proper clause, right, to pass laws that are appropriate for carrying those powers out. In a very real sense, though, Congress is not able to execute the law by itself. That's why we have an executive, right? There are millions of people working for the government, and most of them are not working for the legislative branch. Most of them are working for the executive branch because their job is not to make law. It takes more people to carry out the law than it takes to make the law, right? You know, the executive agencies, right, if you look at all the stuff that's going on now, right, the scientists, the experts, and the agents, right, the people on the front lines, right, those people are all in executive agencies. So, for example, Congress could set a national policy to reduce the number of pollutants or the amount of pollution in the air. But you're going to have an executive agency, right, with staff, with experts to figure out how much of what pollutant is dangerous, you know, and set rules, right, pursuant to Congress's policy to reduce the amount of pollution in the air. So that's called delegation. Okay, when Congress gives authority to executive branch officials to carry out federal policy that is set by Congress through legislation, that is called delegation. To repeat, because Congress delegates, gives to the executive the authority to execute, right, Congress's laws. Now, what Congress is not allowed to do is to delegate and then kind of cop out after it's already delegated authority. So I want to point your attention to a case called INS versus CHADA, C-H-A-D-H-A, in your reading. In that case, Congress had passed a law allowing the Attorney General, which is obviously somebody in the executive branch, right? Right now it's Bill Barr, allowing the Attorney General to suspend the deportation of somebody who's being deported in a case of extreme hardship. But then, in the same law where Congress authorized the Attorney General to do that, it reserved to itself, right, to either house, right, the authority to pass what it called a disapproval bill, and thereby undo the Attorney General's decision and require that the person who was not going to be deported despite the Attorney General's decision. So there are a number of problems with this. The court pointed out in INS versus CHADA. Number one, Congress passes laws. It's supposed to go through both houses, right? So one house making the rules is not going to cut it in a system of bicameral government. Know that word. Bicameral government, right? And this goes back to what we all learned in Schoolhouse Rock, right? Whatever, Sesame Street or whatever that was, right? I am just a bill, right? I come out of the committee and then I pass the House, then I pass the Senate, and then the President signs me and then I'm a law. Well, that's actually the way it works. So by allowing one house of Congress to unilaterally change the rules, that violated the bicameralism principle, right, laid out in the Constitution. It also violated something called the presentment clause. The presentment clause requires that a law, right, Congress, before one of its laws takes effect, present the law to the President for his or her signature, right, or veto. Finally, third problem, wrong way veto, right? The Constitution sets out a procedure by which the President may veto an act of Congress. Congress does not have a corresponding authority, right, under the Constitution to veto something the executive does. So it would be one thing for both houses of Congress to pass a law, it gets to the President's desk and the President vetoes it, right? What's going on in INS versus CHADA is it gives one house of Congress the authority to veto something that an executive agency or officer, right, officer of the United States, the Attorney General, right, gives one house of Congress the authority to veto an executive officer. So wrong way, right? Legislative vetoes do not exist. There is no such thing as a legislative veto. That's what it's called in your book, right? Legislative veto is a no-no. That brings us to Clinton versus New York, right? Probably an even bigger case in this area. That involved the line item veto. There's a couple of policy things going on here that the court sniffed out and said we don't like this. This involves Congress trying to give the president the power to remove certain items of spending or certain tax rules, right, that the president finds will increase the budget deficit after the budget has already been adopted, passed through the Congress and signed by the president. The idea is after the president has already signed the budget, right, which is a law, then the president can start crossing out parts of the budget, right, that the president thinks ought to be removed. You might ask yourself, why would Congress want to give a president that power, right, over Congress's spending decisions? And the reason is to avoid accountability, right? If you're a member of Congress, I want to be able to go to my constituents and say, I got you the money, right? I got you the money. I went to Congress and I got that money put in the budget, and that money was supposed to show up here. But members of Congress realize the budget's getting out of control at the time. So they really don't want to be doing all this spending, but they don't want to be the ones to pay the political price, right, if the spending falls through the cracks, right? So if I'm a member of Congress, I can go to my constituents and say, I got you the money was in the budget. If you want to punish somebody for taking the money out, punish the president, because the president is the one who took the money out. So the court sniffed out this problem, and that's a problem, right, is that one branch of government avoiding political accountability that way is not how the system is supposed to work. Of course, the president on the other end of this is saying, you want to give me more power? Fine, I'll take more power. That's the backdrop to this. Now, the way this was to work was that if the president lined out, let's just keep it simple, lined out an item of spending after having already signed, right, the budget into law. That's weird, right? Starting to cross out parts of a law you don't like after you've already signed it into law, a little crazy. So after the president crosses out an item of spending, is supposed to send a special message to Congress, right, informing them of that. And then a majority of both houses can then override the president. So let's talk about this. The president can actually sign a bill into law, then start vetoing parts of it after having already signed it. Then after the president vetoes parts of the law that's already been signed, right, that goes to Congress, and then Congress can veto the president's veto of a bill that has already been signed into law. As the court notes, then the president, right, retains his or her constitutional prerogative to veto Congress's disapproval, right? So to veto Congress's veto of the president's veto, right, of a law that has already been signed, or a bill that's already been signed into law. After that, of course, Congress can override the president's veto, right, with 2/3 of both houses. So Congress could override the president's veto of Congress's veto of the president's veto of a bill that has already been signed. So you can see the court saying, look, you're trying to avoid accountability, and you've created this constitutional circus here. And so the court reiterates, right, vetoes work in one direction. The president may veto an act of Congress, right, a bill. Congress may not veto the president. As to whether the president can start crossing out parts of a law that's already been signed, the court actually cited to George Washington of all people and said George Washington understood that he had two choices, right, when a bill was presented to him. He either signs the whole thing or rejects the whole thing and vetoes it. You can't accept, right, parts of a statute that you like and reject those that you don't like. So bottom line, when you see vetoes going on, right, on a fact pattern, the president gets to veto an act of Congress. Congress does not get to, right, veto an act of the president. And Congress cannot set national policy, cannot make the rules, right, without A, passing something through both houses of Congress, unless we're talking about something like ratify a treaty, which is specified in the Constitution, right, that the Senate can do that, or confirm, right, nominees. The Senate can do that. But regular laws, right, have to be passed through both houses of Congress, number one. They have to be presented to the president, number 2, and finally the president has to veto or accept the entire bill that is put on his or her desk. So that is delegation, right? Congress's ability to give the executive authority to carry out Congress's laws and policies. That's delegation, and also legislative veto, which again is not permitted under our Constitution. So thanks for listening, and we'll get back to business on dormant commerce here in the next video.